Delighted to be here. Jonathan, thanks so much for the opportunity to cover this topic. I've heard through the grapevine that there was plenty of late night activity last night, and so I'm delighted to see those of you who are here to get things started at 8:30. And we're going to jump right into really a focus on inorganic growth. There's been a lot of content over the course of the last 2 days on how to build better businesses operationally that haven't really focused necessarily on inorganic growth. So as opposed to spending the majority of the panel's time sort of debating the merits of inorganic versus organic growth, we're just going to stare straight at the organic growth decision and a couple of really interesting and challenging questions for industrial businesses that want to do that. But before we jump in, I do want to just briefly introduce myself and then allow the panelists to introduce themselves. My name is Peter Lehrman. I'm the founder and CEO of Axial Networks. We provide an origination platform that helps acquisitive companies uncover acquisition targets. We're a 10-year-old business based in New York City. And Mark, why don't you go next?
Good morning. My name is Mark O'Brien. My business is Value Growth Partners. It's a division of Chicago M&A Advisors. I've got a background in industrial companies. We had a family business that we grew through organic and inorganic methods, and ended up exiting that in a nice exit using Duff and Phelps. And then also did some inorganic growth for an industrial supply company. And this was all prior to starting Chicago M&A Advisors and Value Growth Partners. I found that there are many businesses that are really not ready for an exit, and they need to grow a little. And in most cases, time is short and they need to accelerate their growth. So I've focused on helping businesses in the inorganic space.
Ishti?
Good morning. My name is Istvan Addon. I work for Dunes Point Capital, which is a private family office and investment firm. We've been around since 2013, so roughly 6 years, and in that time period, we've acquired 29 companies. So we've been incredibly active. We've grown companies both inorganically through add-on acquisitions and organically, so happy to speak about both. Our sector focuses are industrial, manufacturing, and distribution. So those are the areas that we know well, and that's where our investment focus tends to be.
Good morning, I'm Troy Berg. I'm from Dane Manufacturing, is the main platform company I work at. I'm a CEO and owner, so like Ishti, we've been very active in the last 12 years, doing about 9 deals total, and we'll talk today mostly about the latest deal, which has a lot of interesting dynamics to the inorganic piece. So, a lot of growth on our company side. 3x in 3 years was our mantra, and that's what we accomplished. So we grew 3 times in 3 years, from 10 to 32 million for those that have seen the stories.
Great, thank you all. We're going to cover 3 topics, provided there's time, and we want to leave some room for questions at the end. We're going to start with just discussing staffing and how to think about staffing for inorganic growth. We're going to also spend some time talking about culture and how you assess culture and cultural cohesion as part of an M&A process. I think it's something that everybody knows is important, but I'm not sure there's a lot of best practice that's well known on how to do it, so we're going to dive in there. And then we will spend a little bit of time talking about the role of technology in industrial M&A, both technology and its use for sourcing, underwriting, and evaluating the merits of acquisitions, but also technology in the context of how it's influencing the way the industrial sector and the industrial businesses think about making acquisitions and skating to where the puck is over a 5 to 10 year horizon. So 3 topics, all in theory could be the single source of the of the forum, but we want to try and cover all three of them. I'm going to jump into staffing first. I would love to have each of you actually weigh in here, but I would really be interested in talking, Ishti, maybe with you first. Can you tell us a little bit about the way Dunes Point, which, as you said, has bought 29 businesses, how do you guys partner with the portfolio companies that you're working with in the context of their inorganic growth? How much of the staffing and the accountability for add-on acquisitions is occurring inside the portfolio companies, and how much does Dunes Point say that that's really where they're going to be most involved?
No, that's a great question, and it's absolutely a partnership. I'd love to answer that question through an example of one of our portfolio companies. And we acquired a company called Artisan Design Group, which we actually sourced through the Axial platform, so thank you, Peter. Sure. This company was a distributor of flooring materials, so carpets, hardwood, tile. And what we found is that home builders have become very consolidated, and the suppliers to those home builders have gotten very consolidated. And there are certain pockets within the building supply industry that have not been consolidated. Flooring distribution specifically is one of them, where there are a number of smaller mom and pops throughout the country, and they control small regions. And so we said, this is a great opportunity for us to buy a platform in the space and then go out and do add-on acquisitions to build a national provider. So right away from day one, we knew this was going to be an add-on acquisition strategy for us. And so we bought a company. It was actually two different companies that we put together, and the management teams at those companies were, I would say, thinly staffed. So right away what we did was we built a plan to hire and build out a finance function for the team and hire people to support the finance. We hired an HR director to run with the company. And then we hired a head of sales, specifically someone who had a pedigree from a big company that could go to each add-on acquisition, work with them, and help drive sales. And the key question is, what do we do on the corporate development add-on acquisition front? And we had the debate of, do we hire someone internally at the company? Do we dedicate someone at the Dunes Point capital level to oversee M&A? And what we actually ended up doing was we engaged a buy-side advisor who had a lot of experience in the flooring distribution space to go out, identify targets in an industry that he already knew well, and help us source deals that way. And what we found doing that was, it was very quick. It was plug and play. Right away, we had a person we didn't have to go out and recruit them, hire them, train them. He knew what he was doing. And two, every add-on acquisition that we bought, and we bought eight in a period of 12 months, was a direct opportunity. It wasn't through an auction process. And this gentleman basically helped find those targets, and the targets viewed him maybe a little bit less, in a more friendly way, and that he wasn't part of our firm, he wasn't part of the portfolio company, he was more of an outside advisor, and the companies viewed him more as an advisor to them as well. So even though he was engaged by us, it was a better partnership. So that's the way we staffed to achieve all those add-on acquisitions.
Great, excellent. Troy, you, as you briefly mentioned, you over a fairly brief period of time tripled the top line of the business with some significant acquisitions, but prior to the acquisition, it wasn't, Dane Manufacturing is not a Fortune 100 business. So, staffing your own full-fledged corporate development department wasn't necessarily on the table. How have you thought about organizing, the acquisition and inorganic growth KPIs and the accountability inside of Dane? How do you think about that, and how do you hold people accountable to developing ideas there, but doing it in a way where not every deal is feeling a lot of pressure to get done just so someone can check a box on their KPI for the year?
Yeah, staffing and finding inside of the targets that you're looking at, trying to evaluate, what are we getting with this company? Is there some capable staff internally to the business? Are we going to have to bring in, a whole new management team? All of those kinds of questions. I find that no matter who's doing the acquisition, whether it's a private company like mine or it's a PE or an investment banker, I mean, those are all very important things to try to figure out in diligence. And many times you're not getting past the CEO or maybe the president or the CFO, 2 or 3 people, and they kind of keep you in the conference room. You get to see an operation maybe after hours or at the tail end of the day when people, aren't as aware of what you're doing, or they bring you in under the guise of as an advisor, or you're from the bank because you're one of the suits, But so we've always taken a very active role to try and figure out what we're going to get, and we do that through testing. And we use a couple of tests that are great tools for us in regards to analyzing the staff and the management. And I've been using these tests for about 12 years internally for my own company to grow my executive staff, as well as just regular staff people, not just executives. This test scales from an engineer, a customer service rep, all the way up to a CEO. And it's administered online. It's really quick. It's a few $100s and you've got your answer. There's 3 components to it. It's Candidate Resources is the name of the company that puts it on. It's profile. And there's 3 parts. First part's intelligence. The second part is, they call personality dimensions, which are really behavior traits. And the bottom part is equivocation and distortion. Did they try to game the test? And so that's the first place I go and look. Is the test valid? Did they really tell us who they were as a person, or were they trying to figure out the answers and game the test? If they're outside they call them stay nines, if they're outside the range on distortion, I just toss it in the basket. I don't even go any further, because they didn't pass the number 1 test for me, and that's integrity. They tried to game the test. They didn't tell me who they were. So we've used that test reliably, Peter, and it's been a great tool for us. And then the other test I want to outline it for y'all is the sales. So you're looking at a target, maybe their sales have flattened and or headed down, and maybe that's part of the reason why they're for sale, or maybe they've just kind of stayed where they are at for the last couple of years, and you want to know the trajectory of why. That's business development and sales, and you want to know if you've got a person inside the business that can sell or not. I always hear throughout my executive ranks people bemoaning their salespeople. And I don't know if you know these numbers, but 4% of the salespeople in B2B sell 92% of all goods and services. 4% sell 92%. So when you're looking for a company, when you're looking at a target and you're looking for that individual, he's a needle in a haystack or she's a needle in a haystack. And how I vet them is through a test that Peter and I are both familiar with called OMG's Curlin. And it's a sales profile test, and it's different than the other profile that I give. And it looks for weaknesses. Looks for 5 areas of weakness for a salesperson. If you have more than 1, it's a red flag for you. And if you have a younger salesperson, you can figure out if you can coach them up or not through some training, Sandler or other tools that are out there for training. If you don't, you know right away what you get. So those are 2 really great tools that we've used. And the last piece is, it's not a negotiable. So when I enter due diligence, the timing that I take in it is, we've completed the LOI. I tell the seller up front that I want to test the employees, and you can roll it out however you want, as a HR thing. You can roll it out as you're going to send them the notice. Either way, I'm getting a copy of the test when they finish it in the next 72 hours. And I need to test all your people. And they always ask me why, and I said, it's just not negotiable, because I test everybody. And trust but verify, right? So we do it after LOIs, before we get into, it's one of the first steps in diligence, so I know right away what we have inside the target. Sometimes we've walked away from a target because it just doesn't have 1 person inside the 4 walls that are talented. So that's been great tools for us.
And Troy, I mean, you've just sort of walked through some of your secret sauce in terms of just evaluating talent and culture inside these target organizations. But inside of the Dane manufacturing organization,
yes,
how are you dividing the responsibilities between managing your businesses and looking for targets? Do you have corporate development? Do you?
I'm sorry. We do not. Like Ishti, we use the Axial network, you guys. And if you're not familiar with Peter's platform, you should be. It's probably the best tool I've seen in 20 years come into the M&A space. Peter's got a great team behind him. This isn't a plug on Axial, but it's how we found our last target. And we evaluated about 125 deals before we got to the target that we were looking for. We had a pretty tight criteria, and we knew kind of exactly what kind of industrial we were looking for as a second platform company. It wasn't going to be a bolt-on. And as we vetted through Peter's network, we got very great help internally from Peter's people, and the tools, it's online, so it really busts the old, CPA, lawyer, banker, broker model, which I never liked anyways, because it was way too regional and way too small of a reach. Unless you were a large PE and had, a much bigger network and people that could work those networks. So we're able, as a small company in the middle of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, be able to look nationwide for targets inside the United States that met, sales, EBITDA, industrial type of, however you want to filter it and qualify it. Issues and looking at flooring for you could find those targets.
And when you look at those opportunities, Troy, whether they're, I obviously appreciate you should come and be my partner in the business, but I'm really interested in sort of leaving aside Axial, whatever help we're offering to people in the market. Who's processing these opportunities inside your organization? Does it all land on your desk? Do you have a president? Do you have a CFO? How do you entrust these big, high-stakes, inorganic decisions when you've got limited staff, but you want to grow inorganically? Just who inside the organization can you sort of entrust to do some of this vetting and assessing, or do you really view it as, really a primary responsibility of your own?
Yeah, it's a great question. You have to have a team. You just can't do it by myself, right? So I've got a team of just a couple of people in the executive suite, my CFO and Mike, my president. So Mike's an accountant by background, and he runs Dane on a day-to-day basis. So he has to wear lots of hats, like many of us these days. And so really, it's playing and winning as a team. And it's just three of us, and we evaluate, the deals based on our criteria. And then sometimes we parse them up, right? So this looks like 2 or 3 interesting deals. Troy, I'll quarterback those. Here's 1 or 2. Mike, I want you to reach out to the investment banker that's selling it, or the private equity firm that's selling it, or the seller. Right. And so we'll do it, that way. There's not like a huge amount of science behind it. It's really just a divide and conquer. Yep.
Mark, what about you? What are you seeing, with some of the businesses that you've worked with as a trusted advisor to them? I mean, obviously we heard from Ishti, retaining a buy-side advisor was instrumental in the rate of acquisitions with the flooring business. How have you thought about working with businesses that that have decided to push hard on growth through M&A?
Well, I would say generally. There aren't that many businesses that I run into that have the team in place. Because if they're at that level, they're not calling me. They're probably out there, working the deals on their own, or their private equity group. My focus is on assisting that business owner that knows they have an issue, and they know they have to grow a little faster. Organic growth is not getting them there, and they are not sure of the financial mechanics. So I end up helping them in that regard. And I rely on CPAs or CFOs, there's B2B CFOs, there's all kinds of resources that can help with the financial mechanics. But strategically, you still got to have, somebody to get in there and really talk through, what's the opportunity. And generally my focus is, we can talk strategy all day long, but, what's the end game? What's the goal? Are you going to exit via PE firm? Because a PE exit means certain things. If you're just growing for the sake of growing, I want to get to $3 million adjusted EBITDA, then you know, we work on that, and we look at, you know, how are you growing, how fast, when do you want to get there, and put together that roadmap of how to get there faster. I mentioned earlier I worked with industrial supply companies, and you understand this. You know, relationships are very strong in certain industries. Industrial supply is one of those. You know, when you have vending machines and other things that are very sticky inside a customer, how do you grow organically? Very, very painful and expensive. So, you know, when you start to discuss these issues, you know, with a business owner, and you start to try to map this stuff out, you can say, well, there's certain things you can do. You know, and one instance, you know, you're really trying to figure out the landscape and try to navigate, you know, what's the best plan of success? Who has similar lines? You know, I'm assuming that when you're going out targeting certain hardwood or, you know, flooring companies, you're thinking in terms of, you know, who are my suppliers, and can I continue to work down that supplier and start to gather momentum within that supplier or supply chain group, so you don't have multiple different relationships to manage. So when you start thinking about things from a relationship standpoint and all these other factors, you know, you can start to map out a strategy that makes some sense, and then you can execute it. And we'll get involved in different ways, because the strategies are different depending on the businesses.
Right.
So, you know, so we kind of are assisting as that corporate development group.
Yeah.
You know, so
Ishti, when you found this buy-side advisor to help you, I mean, it sounds like you kind of hit the bullseye there. How did you said, you know, that you had found a buy-side advisor with a lot of experience in flooring products, but that almost, you know, I didn't realize there was such a thing as a buy-side advisor with a flooring product specialization. Like, how did you actually sort of home in on that, or is the specialization less important and it's really just finding someone who runs a strong process?
No, that's a great question. So the person we found on Axial who sold us the core platform knew the space very well. And so the other thing that was helpful was the founders of the two businesses we initially put together to create that platform created their own industry group. And across that industry group, they had pooled purchasing. So from day one, we had a list of 100 targets within this purchasing group to say, you know, you source us the platform, you know the industry, you know the players in it, here's the list of the people who are in our purchasing group, and oh, by the way, they're using the same supplier, so we can now get scale.
better rebates.
And better rebates. And so he basically went down the list and he called those guys for them, and it had immediate credibility because he was close to the space. So it was, you know, again, it wasn't a process where we had to go out and we had to search and find someone and hire them in-house. And because we found this excellent resource, it was perfect. Let's just engage him to be that advisor.
Right. So, you know, main takeaway here, just for folks who are looking to do rapid add-on acquisition within an industrial sort of subcategory, is if you have a well-assembled list of credible targets, you would be well advised to just consider potentially hiring some third-party firm that can methodically call down that list and execute an outreach script that is, you know, well crafted, not overly aggressive, but clear in terms of articulating the acquisition intent, and then you just sort of triage your way through that pipeline?
That's exactly right. And for us, we were fortunate in that we already had that list. And there are some firms that specialize in creating the list and doing the research, but that's probably the most important thing is not just calling the universe, but being very specific and knowing your criteria to say, look, this is exactly like what you were saying for Dane. We know exactly what we're looking for, and then doing the research to create a very narrow list and spending a lot of time calling those people.
Okay, good. So a couple takeaways on staffing. I hope some of those are specific enough and actionable for those of you that really want to be aggressive in terms of M&A. I don't think there's one approach that works in exclusivity to others. I think a combination of third-party advisors, tools, plus having enough prioritization just inside your own executive organization. It's sort of those three things pulled together that seem to create a formula for an actionable pipeline of acquisition targets. I want to circle back around to this culture topic. As we were preparing for this panel, I said to all three of the guys on the panel, I said, I think in 2019, I think it's very clear to anybody who occasionally, reads a Harvard Business Review article or a McKinsey article or just, some blog. It's very clear that culture is a very significant driver of M&A success and also a very significant driver of M&A failures. You can acquire a business and a year and a half, 2 years later, the entire acquired organization has left because the cultural clashes were just intractable. And you can have a lot of failed acquisitions simply because you didn't systematically think about culture. Troy has touched on some of those things, but I want to come back to culture because I think that while everybody agrees that culture is an important thing in the context of making acquisitions, I'm not sure there's a lot of best practice as to when you are in the heat of an M&A process, how do you actually get systematic about assessing culture and chemistry and management team compatibility. So Troy, at the risk of having you repeat one or two things, could you just focus on the two specific tests that you require acquisition targets to go through, and then clarify just where in the M&A process you employ those? I just want to make sure the audience sort of hears the way that you've taken culture as a priority and actually turned it into a set of psychological tests and stuff like that. I think it's really important, and I don't think a lot of organizations are doing this. So I want to make sure everybody hears about these tests and maybe has a couple ideas that they can take back when they leave the conference.
Yeah, so absolutely, Peter. Thank you for the opportunity. So great question. Again, 9 transactions in 12 years. And when I originally bought Dane was a transaction, and as we went to grow inorganically, as we went to grow organically first at Dane, I was hitting about 50% on the hiring basis, right? Bringing in people from the outside. I said, boy, I got to increase these odds. This is not going as smoothly as I want, and every person you bring in that doesn't work out, costs the company a 6-figure number. Even a customer service rep you hang on to for a year too long is expensive, right? And so I said, and if they screw up a big account, then they're really expensive. So I said, okay, we got to increase our odds. So that led me down this testing trail. And you get into the myriad of all of the things that are touchy-feely, and I don't like those. I like really objective measurements that are tracked to number 1, intelligence. Well, first of all, number 1, integrity. Number 2, intelligence. Number 3, then behavior. What's the best way to predict future behavior? Look at the past behavior, right? Everybody knows that from any HBR articles that look at. Those 3 things then also, play to the culture piece, which I'll get to at the end here. And so from that original trying to grow Dane organically with my staff, we came across these 2 tests. Being a part of Vistage and CEO Network, I've been across the table from hundreds of CEOs and presidents, and I always hear the same thing. Man, if I could just get my salesperson to sell better, we would grow better, and I'm not sure why he or she's not doing his job. And so after, ad nauseum, you hear that repeatedly, you say, well, are they a 4%, are they a 96th percentile seller? And they look at you like deer in the headlights. I say, do you know 4% sell 92%? So there's 26 million salespeople in America, 1 million selling, and 25 million out there confusing the rest of us. So do you have one of those 1 million sellers? Because they're a needle in a haystack. You've got to find them. You've got to evaluate probably 10 to 20 to get one really good superstar. And are you willing to pay them to come to work for you? So as we grew organically, we used these 2 tests. Then I took the test myself. So I'm going to vet this test myself. Does this test really tell me who I am? And if you know yourself and reflect a little bit, like everybody up here on the panel certainly does, then you say, absolutely, this test nailed me. Damn, this is right on. So, okay, that's a pretty good correlation. Well, then as I ran it over all of the targets that we acquired over the last 9 to 10 years, that's when we got really active with the 8 more transactions. I said, wow, these are some great tools. So the first tool, once again, is called Candidate Resources Incorporated. That's the company that has the test. It's administered online. It's a few $100s per candidate you want to test. And you get a consultant for an hour that runs you through the dimensions of the test. So the first part's the first part is intelligence. 5 or 6 categories of intelligence. We're looking at business vocabulary. How quick do they think on their feet? Can they do math? Those sorts of things. Just raw intelligence. The second portion is like 10 behavior dimensions. And the last one is, did they answer the test honestly, or did they try to distort who they were as a person? Were they trying to hide something about their personality? So that's the integrity piece. I look there first, then I look at the other 2, because that validates the test, okay? So that's 2 levels on that test. There's a profile and then the executive profile that you pay a little bit more for because it has a few more dimensions. From that test, you get great correlation to the people, and you understand who they are as individuals. Are they sensitive or are they mentally tough? Well, what job are they going to do? So then that's the other thing you got to give them is, are they going to be the CFO? Are they going to be a customer service rep? Are they going to be an engineer? Are they going to be in sales? Because it matters, how they are. If they're in sales, I sure hope they're not a 1 on sensitive on the continuum, that they're over, closer to the 9 on mentally tough, because they're going to get a lot of no's if they're a good salesperson, and they're covering a lot of ground, right? So having given that test to hundreds of candidates, then you start to know that you can trust it very well, and you can correlate the behavior and the kind of people that you have, right? Because you start to get a sense for the test and different people in different categories. And then the second test that we use, again, is sales and business development. If you're going to grow at your target, or you're going to grow organically with one of your platform companies, you better have a 96th percentile seller in there. And if you don't, you better find one, because they sell most of the products B2B. So we find those people through OMG, is Objective Management Group. I think they're near you, Peter, in New York. And Dave Curlin started the company, and so a lot of times people will use the term, you gave them the Curlin test. OMG is how you'd find it online. It's a very fast-growing company, and same thing. They take the test online. It vets the salespeople. We're looking for 5 weaknesses. If a salesperson has more than one of those weaknesses, they're a red flag. If they have 2 and they're severe, you should not hire them. Every time I've gone against one of these tests because we had to have a person in the chair, I regret it, because the tests just are that good and they're that correlative, okay? So those are the 2 tests we use. On the culture piece, then, to wrap up, from the behavior, smart people like to be around smart people, right? Eagles like to fly together, as they say. And so I always find that if I get incredibly smart people in the room, smarter than me, we're going to solve some problems, right? So that's the first thing. The second piece is, from a cultural standpoint, is, where are they at on the dimensions, as it relates to the personality types, but really the behavior, right? And so, if they're in marketing, if they're in sales, if they're in engineering, do the engineers have similar personalities? Are they falling within? Are they a fit? So you got these dimensions, you've got these ranges they have to fit within, and then it tells you whether they're in the 80th percentile, 82nd percentile. So we draw the line hard at 80%, and all my presidents hate that, because we'll have candidates that come in at 76 or 74, but they really liked them. I said, I don't care. They don't make the low bar, Peter. They don't get on the team, or they're sorry, we're going to free them up for the market. They're not going to stay on the team. And that may sound a bit cold to the room and anybody that might watch this video later, but if you draw that threshold, trust me, 80% is the number. Don't go below it. And if you go below it, only make the exception once in a while when they were a 78 and they fell outside the dimension, the stay 9, they fell outside the range high. In other words, you can get, the test works, it's a little bit complicated, but the consultant can walk you through. If you're too high on intelligence, let's say you're a 9 on intelligence, on an intelligence dimension, in math maybe, and you're an engineer, so we need you to be between the ranges are 1 to 9, okay? So we need you to be between 5 and 8, and you're a 9. Well, you're actually going to get taken down a couple points for that. So if you were a 78 or a 76, and you lost 3 points because you're too smart in math, well, I'm going to give those back to you. I'm not talking about those kinds of exceptions. I'm talking where you're a 72 and you were a 3 on math and you're an engineer, you should be a 7 or an 8, okay? Yeah. Like, no. So those are the 2 tests we use, and we've been really, really successful with them. The more we use them, the more they correlate, the more I know I can trust them. And the tools get better too, Peter, so as you go. So thanks for the chance to explain.
Yeah, obviously, I think there's a lot of nuance to these tests. I think the main takeaway is, if you're really serious about culture, you probably need some cold hard tools in your tool belt in order to really try and assess it, as opposed to just sort of thinking that culture is this mushy thing where you rely on your gut every time. And I think some of these tests can be really, really, really impactful in terms of how you think about assessing talent and assessing culture and cultural compatibility in an M&A context. We have 10 minutes left, so let's maybe try and have these answers be relatively quick and specific. But there's a Wall Street Journal reporter named Chris Mims who covers the technology beat for the Wall Street Journal. He's a pretty well followed journalist, and he wrote an article last year saying every company is now a tech company. And the gist of the article was that, in the modern day, if you're not thinking about technology, whether you're an industrial company, a consumer product company, a healthcare business, if you're not incorporating and embedding, high levels of technology, whether it's software or hardware or sensors or systems, into the way that you think about running your business and the way you think about maybe growing through acquisition, you're just sort of missing the boat. That was the assertion of the article, at least, is that in order for a company to be competitive now, it has to be a tech company, even if it's an industrial company. So I'm curious to just get reactions to that assertion from those of you, and maybe to the extent that you guys feel like there are major technology trends that are impacting industrial businesses or industrial markets where you are active. I think that might be maybe an interesting way to respond to the question. But any big trends that you guys think about, or that when you're looking at acquisition targets, you say, well, if they don't have a response to this major technology trend, then they're really obsolete in 5 to 10 years, and so that's one of the key things we're going to press them on. How do you guys look at the intersection of technology and the industrial sector?
I think industrial companies in some ways are becoming technology companies. And if there's an industrial company that's not utilizing technology, I don't necessarily say this is going to be obsolete, but I say there might be an opportunity to bring some technology to this company to get it to the next level of its evolution. And I'll give you guys a quick example. We own a plumbing, fittings, and fixtures manufacturing and distribution company. And one of our senior advisors, who's the former chief technology officer of Grainger, came onto the board of that company to help advise it. And one of the things he's done is he's implemented a vendor-managed inventory system for that company. So we supply plumbers, and we know exactly what a plumber has on his truck. And when he goes, does a job, uses up a component, we automatically know, and we're mailing him a new replacement part so that his truck is always fully stocked. And that's a great use of technology that makes your customer base a lot more sticky. So yeah, those are the types of technology things that we're constantly thinking about and looking for.
Off-the-shelf software that the business has acquired and configured? Is that,
I think a bit of both. I'd have to look into that, but I know there was definitely a component that we have to implement and build out at the company. Right.
And then there's obviously some sort of relationship to what's on his truck, and it's connected to
us so that we know, or it's either it might be just their ERP system in terms of the types of jobs that they're doing that helps us link into that.
Troy, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the latest target that we acquired, finding the target through Peter's network at Axial, was a company in South Carolina called Therm Cooling, and they make small electronic air conditioners and heat exchangers for electronics. And one of their big spaces they operate in is telecom. And all of our telecom customers are, nuts right now about 5G. So whatever you've heard and read and whatnot, I can just tell you that thousands of units per month go out of our factory that are going to 5G installations for Verizon Wireless, AT&T Mobility, Charter Spectrum, and Comcast. And so as these guys all try to stay relevant in the next decade with, sending you content and having that, third screen, fifth screen tied to their network, even your second screen, which is your TV, or your first screen, which is your TV, right? We're all going to cut our cable bill and we're all cable line, and we're all going to have 5G streaming at us from the box just up the street. And if you don't think it's coming, just look at the side of the road as you drive around this summer, and you'll see guys pulling orange pipe under the ground and pulling a bunch more fiber to your neighborhoods and to Peter's, downtown Manhattan, and Verizon's in 15 cities already with 5G. So 5G's coming, it's coming hard, and we're selling a lot of machines into it. So we're looking for other things that fit in that space, Peter.
We have 5 minutes left. There's actually about 6 or 7 questions here, so let's just go through like a lightning round of questions here. Let's answer them quickly so we can get through as many of them as possible. First question is for you, Ishti. The question is, what was the cost in the example that you gave of acquiring that operating talent? My guess is that question is in relation to the flooring products distribution business, where you added at least 2 or 3 pretty significant C-suite executives to the business, or sort of
right.
VP level executives?
So we hired a few people in the finance function, and those would all be just salaried people for the HR and salaried people for the sales team to build out that structure. We also put I believe we had a retainer success fee-based model for the buy-side broker, and I'm happy to talk about that more specifically after the panel if anyone wants to talk about those details.
When you're staffing those executives, are you sort of marking the compensation for them to the geographic markets that they're based in? I mean, how do you guys arrive?
We absolutely
at
are.
comp?
We absolutely are, and we'll use recruiting firms that will help guide us to what's market for that role and for that position and for the geography that they're in.
Okay.
And that's absolutely critical, because you want to be hiring the top talent, and you want to make sure that they are being compensated to a level that makes it attractive for them to come work for your companies.
Okay, let's see here. For Troy, this is your testing commentary stirred some curiosity here. So one of the questions is, have you ever found a sales candidate who scored super well on the sales test but had no previous sales experience?
Wow. Let me think about that.
While you think about that, I actually happen to use this test myself we use the same test just coincidentally, and we actually we do evaluate sales talent that is often right out of school or maybe 1 or 2 years out of college, and the answer to the question is yes. We part of the test, it's called Objective Management Group, is the name of the test, and part of the test is really just looking at your personality behaviors and whether you, from a personality perspective, are predisposed to being, capable of thriving as a salesperson. So the answer is yes. You can score very highly on the test, even in the absence of a historical selling career. It needs to be configured for a profile like that, but I have seen that happen.
That's exactly the right answer. I had to think about it. All the 100 salespeople we've tested, only 4 have passed it. And I'm one of the 4 that passed it, so those numbers are 4% are right. Ben Adamitis from Viking Cabinet in Chicago passed that test. He was an engineer on the floor. But everybody can sell. You don't think you can, but you sell all the time, right? You try to convince your wife to go to dinner over here. You try to convince your kids to behave at the grocery store. You're selling all the time. You just don't think about it in terms of sales. So And if you don't have industrial experience selling B2B, that's great. Peter's right, you come out of college. If you don't think so, just think about paychecks and ADP and some of the people they put in their sales bullpens that call you all the time, or manpower that want to try and staff your operations, right? Those people have no sales experience. They're coming straight out of college and they're very aggressive on the phone, calling you to try and sell you payroll services or manpower services, right?
This is a tough one to sort of respond to quickly, but I'm gonna force concise answers in the interest of time. Growth can be accomplished either organically, or when growth can be accomplished either organically or via acquisition. In other words, you have avenues to achieve both. What are the criteria that you use to make the prioritization decision in terms of either capital allocation or management team allocation? This is obviously pretty judgment intensive, but if you have the avenues to do both, what is the process by which you think about prioritizing organic versus M&A growth?
I think there are two things you have to think about. It's speed and risk. And from a M&A perspective, speed is obviously your fastest route to growth and getting into a new area or product faster. But then there's also the risk of the cultural dynamics, and does it fit in with the mix, and are you sacrificing something? And for example, we have a company that is in the LED lighting space. They make LED fixtures, chandeliers, very high-end lights going into hotel lobbies and restaurants. They have really nice margins. They have a really good brand, and that's one where we could do add-on acquisitions, and we'll review add-on acquisitions, but they've got a great organic growth story behind them, and we don't want to dilute the brand. So we're very picky on where we spend our time looking at add-on acquisitions.
One quick last one here. When you look at acquisitions, what is your minimum threshold on purchase price, and how do you think about multiples? So again, another pretty wide open question, but Troy, what are the sizes of businesses that you're tending to look at right now? And Ishti, how are you? You guys can go in order. Just
yeah.
quick,
So
ranges.
yep. So in the top line sales, between 5 to 20 million, between 1 to 3 million on EBITDA is the range, and you're looking at them to be add-on for both platforms at this point, because we've got two platforms that can take a lot more business without a lot more cost.
Yeah. Ishti?
Yeah, I mean, we're buying companies, new platforms north of 10 million of EBITDA, add-on acquisitions of any size. You pay a premium for the larger company you end up buying, and we do a lot of work canvassing certain industries to say what are typical EBITDA multiples for this specific industry. And a lot of that comes back to just the overall growth rates for those businesses, and it also comes back to the operational improvement opportunities that you may have for a company. So if you've got a high growth perspective, you can obviously pay a little bit more, and it really comes down to a case-by-case basis.
Okay, we're out of time. So thanks very much for listening. Hope you guys got some really specific, actionable ideas out of this. Obviously, feel free to come and grab any of the panelists now that we're all wrapped up, and you can follow up with anything more specific after the panel. John, thanks for having us.